Far back in time, long before the pyramids of Egypt or the stone rings of Britain, people gathered on a quiet hill in what is now southeastern Turkey. They were not yet farmers, not yet builders of cities, and still they raised towering pillars of stone, carved with foxes, vultures, and lions, arranged in circles that seemed to speak of ritual and belief. This place is Göbekli Tepe, 12,000 years old, the world's earliest known temple, and a mystery that rewrites how we understand the birth of civilization. What makes it extraordinary is not only its age, but its challenge to everything we thought we knew. How could hunter-gatherers with no pottery, no metal, no settled towns create a sacred monument of this scale? Why did they shape stones larger than any human body, align them in patterns, and then bury them as if to hide them from the future? To feel the weight of time, compare it gently. When the Great Pyramid at Giza was rising under the sun, Göbekli Tepe had already been buried for more than 7,000 years. When Stonehenge was raised on the green plains of England, the hill of Göbekli Tepe was already ancient, its story lying silent beneath the earth. Tonight, as we follow its traces, we will not rush to solve every puzzle. Instead, we will walk slowly among the stones in imagination, letting questions guide us like stars. Was faith older than farming? Was gathering to worship the first step to gathering to live? Göbekli Tepe whispers that civilization may have begun not with the plough, but with prayer. Let us drift back 12,000 years to a world just awakening from the long cold of the Ice Age. The air is softer, the rains more generous, and the hills of southeastern Anatolia are alive with green. Rivers carve silver lines across the plains, feeding forests of oak and fields of wild barley. Herds of gazelle move like shadows over the horizon, while flocks of birds rise from the marshes at dawn. Here, life is simple but never idle. Families move with the seasons, building small shelters of reeds and stone, grinding wild grains into flour, and gathering fruits and nuts from the hillsides. Nights are spent by the fire, telling stories of animals and stars. Days are spent tracking game, crafting tools, and weaving baskets from reeds. Survival requires patience, skill, and cooperation, but the world offers enough for those who know how to listen. What makes this landscape remarkable is not only its abundance, but its position. This is the northern edge of the Fertile Crescent, the place where wild wheat first grew thick, where goats and sheep roamed before they were tamed, where nature itself seemed ready to invite change. Archaeologists call it the threshold of the Neolithic, the moment when humanity stood between wandering and settling, between hunting and farming. It was here, on a hill, later named Göbekli Tepe, that scattered groups found common ground, not for shelter, not for trade, but for something harder to define, the urge to gather around symbols greater than themselves. The land provided stone and game, but perhaps it also provided the spark of imagination, the sense that life was more than survival, that the earth held mysteries worth honoring together. And so before the first fields were sown, before villages spread across the valleys, a hilltop became the stage for a different kind of creation. From the silence of nature rose the first hint of monument, a place where ritual would be carved into stone, and memory would take form long before history had a voice. On the hill of Göbekli Tepe, the first thing that greets the eye are the pillars. Tall, slender, and shaped like the letter T, They rise above the circular enclosures as if guardians of a forgotten ritual. Some stand more than 5 meters high, weighing 10 tons each. They were carved from local limestone, drawn out of the earth with stone tools, and set upright in sockets cut carefully into the bedrock. At first glance, the pillars seem simple, just 2 blocks joined at right angles. But the longer you look, the more human they appear. Many bear carved arms along their sides, hands meeting at the front, sometimes holding a belt or a fox pelt. These are not merely stones, they are stylized beings, abstract, towering figures, half human, half symbol, looking over the gathering place with silent presence. Around each central pair of pillars, smaller ones form a ring. Some show animals, foxes slinking across the surface, vultures with wings wide, scorpions poised to strike. Others bear abstract shapes, circles, crescents, patterns we cannot yet translate. Together they create a language in stone, a language without words, but with rhythm, meaning, and power. Archaeologists debate their purpose. Were they gods, ancestors, spirits of animals? Or were they symbols of order, meant to bind wandering groups into a single circle of belief? Whatever the answer, the pillars reveal a world where imagination had already taken monumental form. Think of this in context. When Stonehenge's great sarcens were raised in England 7,000 years later, the builders already had farming, cattle, and communities of hundreds. When the Great Pyramid rose in Egypt with its pharaohs and scribes, the world already knew writing and organized states. But here at Göbekli Tepe, long before villages, people gathered to set up stones taller than themselves and to carve them with symbols no one now can fully read. The mystery is not only what they built, but why they built at all. For hunters and gatherers, survival was already a full-time task, and yet they poured effort into a hilltop sanctuary, as if the act of worship mattered more than the comfort of home. Perhaps it was belief that made them stay, belief that made them work together, belief that planted the first seeds of community. The pillars still stand today, some upright, others fallen, their carvings weathered but visible. They remind us that civilization may not have started with walls or fields, but with the decision to gather around stone, symbol, and silence. If the pillars were the body of Göbekli Tepe, then the gatherings were its breath. Around those carved enclosures, people came together not to live but to celebrate, to mourn, to share. Archaeologists have found enormous amounts of animal bones, gazelle, aurochs, wild boar, birds, suggesting feasts that went far beyond daily meals. Imagine the sound, fires crackling, meat roasting, voices carrying into the night. For groups that normally lived apart, hunting in small bands, these moments were both ritual and reunion. There were no houses here, no hearths for families. Göbekli Tepe was not a village. It was a place set apart, where survival gave way to ceremony. Some scholars believe it was the feasting itself that bound people together, a rhythm of gathering that required cooperation on a scale never seen before. To hunt enough gazelles for hundreds of mouths, to prepare hides and skins for tents, to quarry and lift stones, these were tasks larger than any single group. They required trust, coordination, and the beginnings of social structure. The carvings may hint at the rituals. Vultures with spread wings, often associated with death and the sky, foxes, clever and liminal, slipping between worlds, snakes and scorpions, guardians of thresholds. Perhaps these images told stories of creation, of life and death, of passage from one state to another. We cannot read them with certainty, but we can feel their weight. Picture this contrast. At Stonehenge, ceremonies tied to solstices brought farming communities together, marking the cycle of crops. At Giza, pyramids served as eternal houses for kings who ruled empires. But at Göbekli Tepe there were no kings, no farmers, no scribes, only people who chose to gather, to carve, to feast, to believe. In this way, the site whispers of a time when ritual was not a tool of rulers, but a bond among equals. It raises a gentle but profound question. Did faith create community before farming did? Was it the shared experience of ritual, coming together under stone and star, that first taught people how to live side by side? What is certain is that Göbekli Tepe was never ordinary. It was a sacred hill where memory was carved in limestone, where food became more than nourishment, and where people discovered the power of gathering for something greater than survival. One of the most puzzling mysteries of Göbekli Tepe is not how it was built, but why it was buried. For centuries, the hill lay quiet, its circles hidden under layers of soil and rubble. Archaeologists discovered that this covering was no accident. The enclosures were deliberately filled in, as if the builders themselves decided the stones should sleep beneath the earth. Why would a people who invested such effort hide their creation? Some suggest it was an act of reverence, a way of retiring a sacred space when its purpose was fulfilled. Others wonder if the burial was part of a cycle, closing one chapter before opening another. There is also the possibility of fear that the symbols carved into the stones were thought too powerful to leave exposed, better sealed beneath Earth's quiet blanket. The fill itself holds clues, fragments of tools, bones from feasts, broken pieces of stone. It is as if the last gatherings ended with a gesture of farewell, offerings poured back into the ground. In doing so, the builders preserved the site with surprising care. Without this deliberate burial, the pillars might have eroded or been scavenged by later generations. Instead, they waited, silent, protected, until rediscovered in the late 20th century. When we compare this to other ancient monuments, the contrast is striking. The pyramids of Egypt were built to be seen forever, rising defiantly against time. Stonehenge was left standing in the open, aligned with sun and shadow, an eternal stage under the sky. But Göbekli Tepe was hidden, as if its builders wanted it remembered not by sight, but by absence. Its greatness lay underground in secret, until our age uncovered it again. Perhaps that is why Göbekli Tepe feels so dreamlike. It is not only a monument of stone, but a monument of silence, a secret that survived because it was hidden. In its burial, we glimpse a profound truth. Sometimes the most enduring legacies are those wrapped in mystery. If we look past the stones themselves, we find the people who shaped them, men and women living in a world just stepping away from the Ice Age. They had no bronze chisels, no iron hammers, no wheels or pulleys. Yet they carved pillars taller than themselves from solid limestone. How? With stone tools, flint blades for cutting, pounding stones for shaping, and patience measured not in hours, but in seasons. Archaeologists have uncovered thousands of flint fragments around Göbekli Tepe, evidence of a community devoted to the slow rhythm of work. Each pillar began as a scar in the bedrock, blocks teased free with blows of stone against stone. Once shaped, the monoliths were dragged, likely with ropes of twisted fibre and wooden sleds, up gentle slopes toward the enclosures. To raise them, they may have used levers and simple scaffolding, techniques echoed millennia later in places like Stonehenge. What is most striking is not the technology but the will. Hunters and gatherers with no permanent homes chose to spend months, perhaps years, on stones that offered no shelter, no food. This choice suggests something profound. Belief was powerful enough to demand labor, to bind communities, to carve time itself into ritual effort. Compare this with Egypt, where pharaohs commanded thousands of laborers to build pyramids in the name of kingship, or Stonehenge, where farming societies had the stability to devote resources to ceremony. At Göbekli Tepe, there were no kings, no farms, only scattered bands who came together year after year to honor something unseen. The stones are their testimony. Civilization, it seems, began with hands guided not by rulers, but by faith. Every flake of flint, every groove in limestone carries a whisper from those hands. In their work, we glimpse the dawn of cooperation, the first chapters of a story where humanity learns not only to survive, but to build for the sake of meaning. Beyond the carved pillars and the labor of stone, there were the lives of the people themselves, hunters, gatherers, families moving with the season. To imagine Göbekli Tepe fully, we must picture their daily rhythm. Food was simple, yet abundant. The bones found here tell of gazelle herds hunted on the plains, wild boar chased through forests, and birds snared from the marshes. Wild barley and einkorn wheat grew thick in the valleys, gathered and ground into flour on heavy basalt stones. Nuts, berries, and fruits added variety, while honey and roots sweetened the diet. This was not yet farming, but the land offered enough to sustain gatherings of hundreds. Clothing, too, spoke of resourcefulness. Skins of gazelle and aurochs were tanned into hides, softened with fat and smoke. From plant fibers, cords were twisted into ropes, and perhaps simple woven garments began to appear. Jewelry of bone, shell, and beads of obsidian from distant lands shows that even at this early stage, people adorned themselves, carrying beauty as well as necessity. Their shelters were temporary, likely made of wood and reed, set up near the hill during periods of construction or ritual. By day they worked, hunted, gathered. By night they feasted under the stars, the great pillars looming above like silent companions. Stories were told beside the fire of foxes that slip between worlds, of vultures that carry souls skyward, of ancestors who watch through stone eyes. What makes this life remarkable is the balance between survival and imagination. Though they had no written words, these people had stories. Though they had no palaces, they had symbols. And those symbols demanded gatherings that stretched beyond the practical into the sacred. When we think of later civilizations, the order of Egypt's Nile, the rituals at Stonehenge, we see echoes of this same balance. But Göbekli Tepe shows it at the very beginning, when belief and daily life were still woven tightly together, each shaping the other. Here, in the rhythm of meals and myths, in the quiet of firelight and the labor of stone, we glimpse the first faces of community. They were not yet farmers or kings, but they were already dreamers, already storytellers, already building a world larger than themselves. One of the quiet revelations of Göbekli Tepe is that it may have guided humanity toward farming. For a long time, scholars believed agriculture came first, villages, fields, harvests, and only afterward did temples and monuments appear. But here the order seems reversed. To sustain great gatherings, hunters needed more than chance success in the chase. Feasts required grain in quantity, and wild stands of einkorn wheat grew thick around these hills. Perhaps at first they were gathered, then tended, and slowly, generation by generation, cultivated. In this way, the need to feed ritual may have given birth to farming itself. The site suggests another inversion of assumptions. Rather than agriculture creating belief, it may have been belief that created agriculture. People who came to carve stone also began to sow seeds, ensuring that when they returned, there would be food waiting. Out of ritual came routine, out of ceremony, settlement. When we compare this with Egypt's Nile Valley or the fields that supported Stonehenge, the difference is striking. There, farming was already established before monuments rose. At Göbekli Tepe, it seems the desire to gather around sacred stone may have sparked the first steps toward planting and harvest. Civilization, then, did not grow only from soil but from spirit, and so the temple became not only a place of worship but a turning point in human history. The bridge from wandering to dwelling, from gathering to growing, from memory to history. Step closer to the pillars and the first thing you see are the carving. Not random scratches, but deliberate figures. Foxes with slender bodies, vultures with wings outstretched, snakes curling upward, wild boar in mid-stride. Each animal appears alive, caught in motion, etched into limestone by hands that worked with patience and vision. This is the language of Göbekli Tepe, a language without words but full of meaning. The fox may have symbolized cunning or passage between worlds. The vulture, often linked with death, may have represented the soul's journey to the sky. Snakes and scorpions, coiled and watchful, could have been guardians of the sacred circle. And the great T-shaped pillars with arms and hands carved along their sides seem almost human, perhaps ancestors, perhaps deities, perhaps something in between. We cannot be certain of these interpretations, yet even in uncertainty, the carvings reveal what mattered to these people: animals, cycles, thresholds, the fragile border between life and death. They remind us that before writing, humanity already told stories, stories in stone, shared by torchlight, carried in memory. When compared with Egypt's temples, where hieroglyphs lined walls with prayers to gods, or with Stonehenge, whose meaning is hidden in alignments of sun and shadow, Göbekli Tepe stands apart. Its carvings are older, rawer, more primal. They carry the pulse of a world where nature itself was sacred, where animals were not symbols of gods, but gods in their own right. In these stones we sense the beginning of myth, not polished, not codified, but urgent and alive, the first chapters of humanity's effort to understand the unseen. Stand at the center of one of Göbekli Tepe's enclosures, and the shape itself speaks. Two towering T-pillars rise in the middle, facing each other like guardians. Around them, smaller pillars form a perfect ring, each carved with creatures of earth and sky. It feels less like architecture and more like a vision of the universe in stone. The circle may have represented more than a gathering place. It may have been a cosmos in miniature. The central pillars, carved with arms and hands, stand as human-like figures, perhaps ancestors or spirits that linked the people to the unseen. Around them, the animal-carved stones form a living border, echoing the world of nature that surrounded daily life. Together they create a stage where ritual could unfold, with worshippers moving in harmony around the stones, reenacting the balance of life, death, and renewal. What makes this remarkable is the sense of order. These were people without writing, without cities, yet they built a space that embodied ideas larger than survival. The circle bound them, not with walls, but with meaning. It was geometry born of belief. Compare this to later monuments. Stonehenge also used the circle, aligning stone with solstice light, while Egyptian temples aligned with the rising sun and stars. But Göbekli Tepe predates both by thousands of years. It is the earliest known expression of cosmic order in stone, a sign that humanity was already mapping the heavens and the mysteries of existence long before they mapped their fields. Here, in the quiet symmetry of circles and pillars, lies the first hint that architecture was never only about shelter. It was about placing ourselves within the universe, about giving shape to the invisible. Among the foxes, vultures, and snakes, there are also marks more difficult to explain. Circles, crescents, H-shapes, patterns carved with care, but with meanings lost to us. Some resemble constellations, others seem like abstract symbols. Were they calendars tracking the rhythm of seasons? Were they clan emblems identifying different groups who gathered here? Or were they prayers in a language that never found letters? One carving shows a headless human figure beneath vultures with wide wings. Another shows a scorpion beside strange linear marks. These are not decorations, but messages, glimpses of a worldview we can only approach in silence. They remind us that Göbekli Tepe is as much a library as it is a temple, a library without books whose pages are stone. What deepens the mystery is the absence of explanation. Unlike Egypt, where hieroglyphs tell us the names of gods and kings, or Mesopotamia, where clay tablets record harvests and myths, Göbekli Tepe leaves us with images alone. It is as if the builders spoke to the future in riddles, confident that meaning could be felt even if not understood. And perhaps that is the point. To stand before these unreadable signs is to remember that mystery itself is part of the human journey. The need to mark, to symbolize, to carve meaning into the world is older than writing. It reaches beyond time, inviting us not to solve, but to wonder. Even now, as archaeologists work slowly to uncover more enclosures, many carvings remain hidden, waiting beneath the soil. What they will reveal or conceal remains one of the great open questions of history. To feel the true weight of Göbekli Tepe, we must place it beside the monuments we think of as ancient. Consider the Great Pyramid of Giza, built around 2600 BCE. Even by that time, Göbekli Tepe had already been buried for more than 7,000 years. When Egyptian kings were aligning stone to the stars, this Anatolian hill had long fallen silent, its sacred circles hidden beneath earth. The difference is more than age, it is purpose. Egypt's pyramids were built as eternal tombs for pharaohs, monuments to kingship and power. They rose from an organized state with scribes, armies, and farmers to sustain the labor. But Göbekli Tepe was built without rulers, without writing, without agriculture. Its pillars are not graves for kings, but symbols for a people who had only just begun to imagine permanence. This comparison forces us to pause. If pyramids represent civilization at its height, then Göbekli Tepe represents something else, civilization at its birth, raw and unshaped, yet already reaching for the sacred. Imagine that, when Giza was alive with laborers hauling stone for Khufu's tomb, Göbekli Tepe was already a memory of a time before farming. It is as if the pyramid builders were standing on a stage whose foundations had been laid thousands of years earlier by unknown hands. And so the stones of Göbekli Tepe whisper across ages to the stones of Egypt. One declares the might of kings, the other the unity of people. One speaks in the language of empire, the other in the language of beginnings. Both endure, but Göbekli Tepe remains the elder voice. Far to the northwest, on the windswept Salisbury Plain, another circle of stone would rise, Stonehenge, built around 2500 BCE. To stand within its great sarsens is to feel the weight of ritual, the power of alignment with sun and sky. And yet, when Stonehenge's first lintels were lifted into place, Göbekli Tepe had already slept beneath soil for nearly 7,000 years. The echoes between them are undeniable. Both are circles of stone, both are places of gathering and ceremony, both designed not for shelter, but for meaning. Yet their differences reveal how far humanity had travelled. Stonehenge was the work of farming communities, settled in villages, supported by harvests that freed hands for monumental labour. Its purpose seems tied to cycles of the sun, marking solstices, guiding agriculture, linking heaven and earth through light. Göbekli Tepe, by contrast, belonged to a world before crops, before cities, before kings. Its builders were still hunters and gatherers, their lives moving with herds and seasons. The circles they raised were not calendars of fields, but sanctuaries of belief. If Stonehenge was a temple of time, Göbekli Tepe was a temple of origins. To place them side by side is to see a long thread in human story. The circle as sacred form. It is a shape that repeats across cultures and millennia, from Anatolia to Britain, from campfires to cathedrals. Perhaps it is because a circle has no beginning and no end, echoing the cycles of life and death, day and night, memory and return. Stonehenge shows us ritual shaped by farming. Göbekli Tepe shows us ritual shaping farming itself. One echoes the other, but the elder circle still holds the first word. Beyond Egypt and Britain, Göbekli Tepe belongs to a wider tapestry of humanity's earliest monuments. Across the world, people raised stone, earth, or wood not for shelter, but for meaning. In Malta, temples carved into limestone appeared around 3600 BCE. In Peru, the sacred city of Caral rose around 3000 BCE, with plazas and pyramids echoing ritual life. In Mesopotamia, ziggurats reach skyward as stairways for the gods, yet all of these are younger siblings. Göbekli Tepe predates them by millennia. Its circles were already buried when Malta's temples were shaped, when Caral's plazas filled with song, when ziggurats towered over the Tigris and Euphrates. It is not part of this chorus, it is the first note, struck long before the orchestra gathered. This makes Göbekli Tepe both familiar and strange. Familiar because its pillars show that the human impulse to gather, to carve meaning into earth and stone, has always been with us. Strange because it stands so far before the rest, as if humanity briefly leapt ahead, created something profound, and then let it fall silent until the world was ready again. Some scholars call it the world's first temple, others hesitate, suggesting it was something even broader, a sanctuary where people discovered themselves as a collective, where the sacred was not separate from daily life, but its very foundation. Placed within the web of world heritage, Göbekli Tepe is less a chapter than a prologue. It reminds us that the story of civilization did not begin with kings and cities, but with circles of stone, with belief and imagination, with the quiet decision that life meant more when lived together. For thousands of years after its construction, Göbekli Tepe stood in silence. Then at some point around 8000 BCE, the people who had raised its pillars chose to bury them. Stone circles, once open to sky, were filled with rubble, soil, and fragments of daily life, animal bones, tools, broken pieces of limestone. The hill became smooth again, a mound in the landscape, its secret hidden beneath layers of earth. Why did they do it? That question lingers like a quiet echo. Perhaps the rituals changed and the old sanctuaries were closed in reverence. Perhaps new beliefs made the circles obsolete, and burying them was a way of ending one chapter before beginning another. Or perhaps the act of burial itself was ritual, sealing the stones in the earth as offerings to the unseen. Whatever the reason, the effect was lasting. For millennia, Göbekli Tepe vanished from memory. Winds crossed the plateau, herds grazed its slopes, and generations passed without knowing what lay beneath their feet. By the time Egypt's pyramids rose, the Anatolian hill was already forgotten. By the time Stonehenge was built, its carvings had already slept for thousands of years. This deliberate concealment preserved the site in a way that open monuments could not be preserved. While temples in Mesopotamia eroded or were rebuilt, Göbekli Tepe lay untouched, like a book, closed and sealed. It waited, buried, until the world was ready to read it again. And so the first temple became the first great mystery. A monument meant for memory, hidden so completely that it slipped into silence for nearly 10,000 years. For centuries, Göbekli Tepe remained only a hill, unremarkable to the eye. Local villagers called it Potbelly Hill for its rounded shape, ploughing its slopes and scattering stones without knowing their weight in history. To them the land was ordinary, a place to graze animals, gather stones for walls, and watch seasons change. In the 1960s, a team of archaeologists from the University of Chicago surveyed the site briefly. They noted flint fragments, bits of limestone, and curious shapes on the surface. But they assumed it was just another medieval cemetery, one of many across Anatolia, and the hill was left untouched once more. It was not until 1994 that everything shifted. A German archaeologist, Klaus Schmidt, walked the mound and noticed carved stone protruding from the soil. Unlike grave markers, these fragments were massive, worked with a precision that spoke of something far older. Intrigued, he began excavations. What emerged from the earth stunned the world. Circles of T-shaped pillars, some taller than men, carved with animals in relief. The ordinary hill revealed itself as the world's oldest known monumental sanctuary. As layers were uncovered, it became clear that the burial had preserved the site with extraordinary care. Pillars still stood in sockets cut into bedrock. Carvings of foxes and vultures remained sharp, despite being 12,000 years old. Göbekli Tepe had not merely survived, it had waited. The discovery shook archaeology. Textbooks that placed farming before temples now faced a reversal. History had to be rewritten. Suddenly, a forgotten hill in Turkey forced scholars to rethink the very foundations of civilization. What was once a mound for grazing animals became a doorway into humanity's earliest imagination. A place thought ordinary became extraordinary, a reminder that sometimes the greatest wonders lie just beneath our feet. The unearthing of Göbekli Tepe in the late 20th century did more than add another side to archaeology. It unsettled the very timeline of human history. Until then, the stories seemed clear. People first farmed, then settled, then built temples. But Göbekli Tepe whispered the opposite. Here was proof that faith, ritual, and imagination may have preceded farming, that people built sanctuaries before they built villages. This revelation rippled across disciplines. Archaeologists re-examined sites once dismissed as simple camps. Historians rewrote chapters about the dawn of civilization. Even philosophers reflected on what it means to be human, that perhaps our first step toward culture was not sowing seed, but raising stone in search of meaning. The site also captured the public's imagination. News outlets called it the world's first temple. Writers compared it to Atlantis or the Library of Alexandria, mysteries hiding truths about beginnings. Visitors traveled from around the globe to walk among the pillars, to feel the quiet presence of a place older than pyramids, older than Stonehenge, older than memory itself. And with discovery came responsibility. Preserving 12,000-year-old limestone against modern weather is no easy task. Shelters now protect some enclosures and excavations continue with care. Each season reveals new carvings, new rings, new fragments of a story still unfolding. In its rediscovery, Göbekli Tepe has become more than archaeology. It is a mirror reminding us that our search for meaning is as old as humanity itself. What began as a forgotten hill is now a symbol of beginnings, beginnings of story, of belief, of civilization. Ever since its rediscovery, scholars have asked the same question. What was Göbekli Tepe for? The absence of houses or hearths suggests it was not a village. The abundance of bones and carvings points instead to ritual. One theory sees it as a sanctuary of the hunt. The animal imagery is striking: foxes, wild boar, gazelles, vultures. These were not random carvings, but creatures central to the lives of the gatherers. Some believe the pillars honored the spirits of the hunt, asking protection for hunters or giving thanks for prey. Feasts of roasted gazelle found in the fill may have been offerings as much as celebrations. In this sense, Göbekli Tepe would have been the earliest known temple devoted not to gods of sky or sun, but to the raw relationship between humans and animals, a place where people recognized that survival was shared, that life required respect as well as taking. The idea is compelling, especially when compared with later traditions. In Egypt, animals were sacred to gods: falcons for Horus, cats for Bastet, bulls for Apis. At Stonehenge, the midwinter feasts of cattle and pig may have echoed seasonal sacrifice. Göbekli Tepe seems to stand at the root of this lineage, the moment when humans first raised stone not only for shelter, but for the spirits of the living world around them. If so, then the site is not only a temple of beginnings, but also a whisper of balance between hunter and hunted, between earth and sky, between the fragile life of people and the wild abundance of nature. Another line of thought sees the great T-pillars not as animals, but as people, or perhaps something more than people. Look closely, and you find arms carved along their sides, hands folded at the front, sometimes holding belts or fox pelts. These are not just blocks of stone. They are figures, standing silent and tall, larger than life. Some scholars suggest they represent ancestors, the revered dead, raised to keep watch over the living. Others believe they were gods or spirits, embodiments of forces beyond human reach. The scale alone, 5 meters tall, weighing 10 tons, suggests beings of power meant to inspire awe. If this is true, then Göbekli Tepe becomes not just a sanctuary of the hunt, but a meeting place between the living and the unseen. Families might have gathered beneath the pillars to honor those who came before, to ask for guidance, or to reaffirm bonds that stretched beyond generations. What is haunting is how this predates every written religion we know. Long before Zeus or Ra, before the gods of Sumer or the rituals of Stonehenge, these nameless beings stood in stone, guardians of mysteries we can still feel, but not fully name. In a world without temples of brick, without kings or priests, Göbekli Tepe may have been the first threshold between humanity and the divine, a place where people carved their longing for something greater into the very bones of the earth. Among the more fascinating theories is the idea that Göbekli Tepe was not only a sanctuary, but also an observatory. Some researchers argue that the carvings and alignments of the enclosures may echo constellations in the night sky. A vulture carved beside a circle might represent the constellation we call Sagittarius. Other symbols could be maps of the heavens, frozen in stone 12,000 years ago. If true, this would place astronomy at the very dawn of human culture. Long before writing or farming, people may have lifted their eyes to the stars, marking their movements, weaving them into myth. The circle of pillars could have been more than a temple. It could have been a calendar, a guide for migrations, hunts, and rituals tied to the turning of the year. The idea is debated, but it resonates with later echoes. Stonehenge, thousands of years later, clearly aligned with the solstices guiding the rhythm of crops. Egyptian temples track the rising of Sirius to mark the flood of the Nile. If Göbekli Tepe anticipated these traditions, it would stand as the first bridge between earth and sky, showing that even in a world of hunters and gatherers, people sought harmony with the cosmos. Whether or not the stars were truly mapped here, the theory reminds us of something timeless, that humans have always looked upward. In the carvings of foxes and vultures, in the circles of stone, we may hear the first whispers of constellations, stories written in the heavens, then echoed on earth. What Göbekli Tepe leaves us is not only stone, but a lesson about ourselves. For here, 12,000 years ago, people gathered to create something larger than survival. They could have spent their days only hunting, only searching for shelter. Instead, they chose to carve, to build, to believe. This choice suggests that the first step towards civilization was not farming or writing, but imagination. The willingness to see meaning beyond the visible, to treat stone as sacred, to bind communities through shared ritual, that was the true beginning. In this sense, Göbekli Tepe is less a temple and more a mirror, showing us that humanity has always needed stories as much as food, symbols as much as tools. Later monuments, Egypt's pyramids, Stonehenge's circles, refined this impulse into systems of kingship and agriculture. But Göbekli Tepe stands as the raw spark, the first firelight of faith. It reminds us that culture was born not from necessity, but from wonder. And perhaps that is why, even buried for millennia, its pillars still speak. They are not only ruins of a forgotten people, they are a message carried across time, that to be human is to search for meaning, to raise our eyes from earth to sky, and to carve belief into stone. Perhaps the most enduring gift of Göbekli Tepe is its mystery. Unlike the pyramids, which proclaim their purpose as tombs, or Stonehenge, which aligns with the solstice sun, this sanctuary resists explanation. It does not tell us who built it or why. It simply stands silent, older than memory. That silence is powerful. It invites us not only to study, but to wonder, to imagine the faces of people who dragged the stones, the voices that echoed through the circles, the firelight that flickered against carved foxes and vultures. We do not know their names, but we feel their presence. They remind us that mystery itself is a form of heritage, an inheritance that keeps us curious, humble, awake beneath the stars. Even today, as archaeologists uncover more enclosures, questions multiply. Was this truly the first temple, or one of many, still hidden beneath other hills? Did it inspire farming, or reflect a deeper shift already underway? Are its carvings myth, calendar, or both? Each answer seems to open new doors, and so Göbekli Tepe remains unfinished, not in stone but in meaning. Its greatest legacy may be that it refuses to give us certainty. Instead, it asks us to live with wonder, to accept that the oldest truths are sometimes questions that never close. To walk among the pillars of Göbekli Tepe is to feel the closeness of people who lived 12,000 years ago. The stones blur the distance between then and now. Though their world was one of gazelle hunts and wild wheat, their questions were not so different from ours. Who are we? Where do we come from? What lies beyond life? The builders are gone, their language forgotten, but the stones still carry their longing. In that sense, Göbekli Tepe is more than archaeology. It is a bridge across time, a whisper that says, we too wondered. We too searched for meaning. When we compare it with Egypt's pyramids or Stonehenge's circle, the connection is clear. Each monument, however distant in time or place, is part of the same story, the human desire to anchor the invisible in the visible, to take belief and set it in stone. Göbekli Tepe simply reminds us that this story began far earlier than we imagined. Today, standing in its enclosures, travelers find not only history, but reflection. The stones are ancient, yet the questions they raise are alive. In this way, Göbekli Tepe belongs not to the past, but to the present, and perhaps to every future that dares to look back. For in the stillness of its circles, we see the most human truth of all, that across ages, across distances, across the rise and fall of civilizations, we are connected by the same search for meaning under the same endless sky. As we leave Göbekli Tepe behind, the hill rests once more in silence, its circles half buried, its carvings glowing faintly under the sheltering night. We began with a puzzle, the world's first temple, older than pyramids, older than Stonehenge, a place that should not exist, and yet does. And in tracing its stones, its people, its mysteries, we have walked through the very dawn of belief. What Göbekli Tepe tells us is simple yet profound, that humanity has always been more than survival. Long before farming, long before cities, we gathered not just for food, but for meaning. We raised stone, not for shelter, but for spirit, and in doing so we laid the first foundations of culture, memory, and imagination. The temple's true purpose will likely remain hidden, just as many of its circles still sleep beneath the soil. But perhaps that is the beauty. Not every question needs an answer. Not every mystery must be solved. Sometimes the quiet not knowing is what allows us to dream. And so, as you drift into rest, let the image remain. Circles of stone under a starry sky, firelight flickering against carved foxes and vultures, voices of a people long gone but never truly lost. In their silence, may you find peace. In their mystery, may you find wonder. Göbekli Tepe waits, timeless and patient, a reminder that we too are part of a story still unfolding. Thank you for journeying through time tonight. As you close your eyes, imagine the gentle hills of Anatolia under moonlight, where ancient stones rest quietly, untouched by thousands of years. Let their silence become your silence, their stillness your stillness. Breathe deeply and allow the mystery of Göbekli Tepe to cradle your thoughts. Sleep peacefully, knowing that some questions are meant to remain dreams.